Conversations on a Bridge. There are two videos on Conversations on a Bridge for the reason that I directed some shows and I performed in some shows, or some scenes rather. This is the video on directing. Now the two scenes that I directed in Conversations on a Bridge were Tony Winwood's Changes in Life and Max Shaw's Untitled. Tony Winwood's Changes in Life is about a young man who is considering suicide by the side of a bridge, and a police officer stops him and talks through his problems, and it turns out that the young man is scared because he's going to be graduating from university and doesn't know what to do with himself. And then the police officer talks to him, explains that all people go through this. He talks about his own experience in childhood, in youth, adolescence rather, and manages to talk him back. Now, the reason I picked this was because I thought it was a very important script, in the sense that it's a common anxiety, a common fear, especially with it being a university show. A lot of students would see it, which is the perfect demographic, and this is the sort of show that can help that. We auditioned the piece, and I chose to cast Ryan James as the young man Chris, and I decided to cast Mark Wilson as the police officer. Ryan gave a very powerful, fearful performance, which could go from very angry to upset, and Mark had this reserved, quiet, understanding nature in his character. With the performance, the switch that I decided to do was to have the police officer as quite an old man, and when he talks about his youth, he separates off from Chris, and then he becomes youthful in his performance, and he becomes the young man he was, and he talks about his experiences back then, showing that, you know, everyone has been young, and stressing the point that everyone has gone through this, and he's not the first person to feel that way. Another thing I decided to do here was with the lighting. It's an idea I'd seen before and I'd wanted to try, but I felt that it was poignant and it would work here. That I had the characters in the dark, or on one side. I had a spotlight on one side on the police officer to look like a street light, and then I had Chris in the dark, and the police officer had a torch, and he would shine it on Chris, and then at certain points that were very tense, Chris climbed over the bridge, giving up he was going to jump, and the light goes off, and then the audience doesn't know what's going to happen, and it makes it more tense. Things like this. At another point, when the police officer goes away to talk about his childhood, he turns the light off on Chris because Chris isn't the focal point, and it pauses that part, and we're not looking at that, and we're looking at the police officer. I did also choose to change some of the lines, and I discussed this with the writer Tony, and he agreed. And it was only small changes, but what I decided to change was a point at the end. Chris talks about the course he's on. He wants to be a mechanic, and he has an aspirational moment, and I kept that, but I took out the fact that he was a mechanic, and I made it less specific. The reason being that it was more relatable. If it's just any course with an aspiration to be somewhere, and any student can slot themselves in there, and can imagine that as them. And I felt that made it more powerful as a show. The other piece, Max's Untitled, I chose. This scene is about a young man, Ben, who is not necessarily suicidal, but he's by the side of the bridge and he's drinking pure vodka, and he is just depressed and he's thinking about life, and a girl, Sammy, comes on and she tries to talk to him and he's not really listening, and she is very extroverted and carries on talking. And then when they finally start to converse, he explains what's happened. His girlfriend's left him, his father's died, and then she reveals that her mother has died as well, and she struggled with it, but she gives him inspiration that you have to carry on and you can't pass the bad feelings on to other people. It's then revealed at the end that she is actually a ghost because she committed suicide. I chose the piece because I felt that it's very sweet. It's humorous, and I wanted one to contrast with the other piece that's just very dark throughout the whole thing. But it's not humorous in that it becomes silly. It really stressed what was poignant, and I felt that both the characters were very vivid. And in the show, I stressed the silent moments and had lots of gaps when Sammy was talking. So she wasn't just blathering on, but she'd say something and feel the awkwardness that he wasn't speaking back to her. And she would stop and she would think and maybe go to say something and stop, and then would carry on. I also introduced the idea quite late on that because Ben was ignoring Sammy at the start, that Ben couldn't actually see Sammy because she was a ghost, and there's a point where she knocks him, she bumps into him, and then suddenly you can see her and he's quite confused, but suddenly notices her. Just to give some inkling that something was strange, to reference that she was a ghost. In the audition, I cast Matthew Bingham as Ben, and I cast Haley Thompson as Sammy, and they both did wonderful performances. Haley really got the loud excitement of the character, but took on direction really well. At points where I told her to slow down and let the silent moments ride out. Matthew Bingham took on direction really well as well. He started he started acting it annoyed, and I told him that he was doing it as though he'd had a bad day and he was just annoyed and wanted to chill out and have a drink, and I said it's not that, he's really distraught, and it's not even at the point where you're crying, but it's at the silent moment after and you've stopped crying, and everything just seems quite sobering and just to reflect on the bad things that have happened. And there was such a contrast, and then we would change it throughout and have them become more close and start talking, and then at the point where Ben reveals that his father's died, it goes silent again, and they stop, and then they just experience it, and we really tried to flesh out every emotion, and I think it worked really, really well.